Oh, it is a good day, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's a good day to make it a great day, I think. Welcome back, Risers and Thrivers. We are certainly excited to have you back with us here on the Rise Today Inspirational podcast, where we are recording live so that you can tune in and ask your questions as we are going through the show. I want to say just right off the get-go, we are humbly brought to you by Popped Collar Productions, and we are so grateful to be able to bring you this show. We hope you always appreciate the diversity in guests and in stories and in tools that we strive to share with you. Here at the show, we always strive to open up the raw conversation about hardship and to share tools with you to share, to stay the course and to rise in the face of adversity, to bounce back and, to thrive like you've never imagined thriving before. And today's show, my goodness, will certainly do that for you. I cannot wait to bring you our inspirational guest of the day. I'm just so honored that she is here with us. We hope you've enjoyed all the shows that have come to you from season 2 so far. So today we have with us the amazing Dr. Sharon Blady. You are just going to be so inspired by her incredibleness, by her story, and by her incredible background and her diversity of interests. I just think she's like literally the coolest. Okay, so today, as we said, Dr. Sharon Blady, she's the former Minister of Health of Manitoba. She's a self-proclaimed comic book geek, a cosplayer, a K-pop fan, an academic researcher, an author, an entrepreneur, and a keynote speaker. You will just be so inspired by her. In the face of navigating depression, anxiety, PTSD, and even ADHD, she found the courage and the know-how to change these diagnoses, to change the way she looked at these diagnoses, and to really bring those out as her superpowers, which is just remarkable. And she now serves in this most phenomenal way to help others do that very same thing in the face of hardship and adversity, to change the way they see their adversities and their struggles, and to adopt them as their superpowers and become the hero in their own story. And now I am just so excited to welcome Sharon. I'm so excited for this conversation today because she and I, we just share a lot of the similar views, and this is just going to be a great show. Welcome, Dr. Sharon Blady.
Well, thank you for having me here. It's really wonderful and it's exciting. And again, I really appreciate the message that you put out there. So any way that I can help your audience, and again, that idea of obstacles to opportunities and reframing is sort of a key part of what I do and how I've gotten through so much. And some days it's been a little wacky, as you mentioned there, that list of things. I mean, I've survived suicide, cancer, domestic violence, and a divorce, and politics. And I'm not sure which one of those is the larger ordeal. And some of them are all at the same time. So.
And despite her amazing successes, I mean, it's really important to highlight that Sharon, was once a single mom on social assistance.
Yeah.
And this is going to be a fabulous conversation because we're really going to see how we can all evolve, right? In the face of adversity and in the face of hardship, how we can use that to propel us onto these new paths that we were always intended for, right? And I'm just really excited for this. So Sharon, you've been through so much. You've experienced so much. You have so much lived experience, right? And you also have so much education, with your PhD to complement all that you do. And I'm just really excited for this conversation. So can you start with us by taking us back, to the life of Sharon when she's growing up and, take us back to when this all started?
Oh boy. Well, I mean, okay, the geek girl stuff does go back early in life. And I mean, I was raised in a household where, I took it for normal, and it's something that I've come later to realize that as much as I wasn't thrilled about it, and I guess I'd say I'd normalized it, there was actually a fair amount of abuse. And so what I hadn't realized was a lot of things that I had done adaptively are now, I would know to be, trauma behaviors. So I was the chronic overachiever. I was also undiagnosed as far as ADHD. So I grew up this kid that sort of, on one level, I was the nerdy kid. And on another level, I kind of bounced around. So again, to date myself, I don't know if anybody remembers, there was a doll called the Chatty Cathy doll where you pulled the string and it talked. That was my nickname
Love
within the family. Da, 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 da. Again, so I would do all these things, and I was the kid that was, like I said, the chronic overachiever in school, and that was the blessing and the curse. I would get, complimented on it, but then simultaneously taken down. Like, it's great that you got this mark, but don't let it go to your head. And so I ended up in these gifted programs, ended up in university. And then that's when things started to really change, and especially the stuff around my mental health, because I ended up moving out to the West Coast. I'm from, the prairies from Winnipeg. I ended up on my master's degree out there, and would end up in a relationship that was, in some respects, I should have seen the red flags. It wasn't so much a couple red flags. And in retrospect, it's like, oh my God, there's a parade going by. But anyways, 25.
what were some of those red flags? If
Oh,
you don't mind asking, just so
just
we can let it know.
commitment issues. Well, and again, a lot of them I realized in retrospect I didn't see as clearly as I might have, because I was raised by an abusive narcissist. So a lot of the traits that I would actually find attractive about this person, or what I considered normal, and this was actually that emotional distance and all of these other kinds of things. So I guess maybe I should cut myself a little bit of slack and say that it was in retrospect that I saw that there were red flags there, but I had filters from growing up in an abusive environment that didn't let me see them. So for me, I had just sort of gone through life, and it was just, do all the things. This was the big challenge, was to, oh God, here I am. I'm a single mom trying to finish my master's degree. And what happened was, when I had my son at 25, and again, grateful for the support that I had from certain family members. And I figured, well, you know what? I'm becoming a single parent at 25, but as a single parent at 25 while going to grad school, I'm a suburbanite. I'm this, that. I've got all these different things. And again, very much like other trauma survivors, I don't have it as bad as other people. And then all of a sudden, found myself one day driving back from the campus here, and I was going over a bridge over some train tracks. And all of a sudden, I was just like doing the whole, if I just went like this with my wrist, it would be better for he and I, and it would end our pain and suffering. And what I hadn't really fully articulated in my brain was that, yeah, I hadn't been doing really well. There were times my folks would pick up my son to babysit him so I could do work, and I would literally just crawl back into bed. And I was having all this stuff going on, and it wasn't till that moment of again thinking about driving us off a bridge that some other part of my brain, and I still don't know what part it is now, went, oh, hold on, that's not the rational thought that you think it is, and stopped me from doing it, drove home, called the doctor. And that was the first time I had any kind of a mental health diagnosis. And so I was diagnosed with postpartum, which would then stretch out to being, told that I had clinical depression, was put on medication. And the biggest problem, this is back in the 90s, was that I was never given any therapeutic support. So I would be medicated. I would move out to Toronto to start my PhD. And as things got progressively, the medication wasn't working. It was upped, upped, upped. So finally, I got to the point I was on 350 milligrams of Luvox a day. And for those that don't know it, that's the maximum dosage. And I went cold turkey because I felt even crappier, which is another thing one should never do. But at the time, in the headspace I was in, so I was going through all this upheaval. And it wasn't till I hit a really wonderful psychotherapist. And first of all, he just, again, did the whole thing around, what did you do with the meds? And how come you never ended up hospitalized? Because he's like, for your body weight, I would be wary to give that dose to somebody that's like a foot taller, twice your body weight, and a linebacker. So there was going through that. So I was doing that as a single mom in Toronto, trying to get that all together, would end up, somehow pulling it off. And I think this is the other part, as I think about some of the things that I got through and what I accomplished. And it was just, I don't know what else I would have done. I really, you get into that autopilot. And what I would end up doing is eventually crossing paths with an old classmate. We would become engaged, get married, and then have another child. So there's about a 10-year age difference. And that relationship, again, like clockwork, was somebody that I didn't see the red flags with, because he is literally in so many respects a carbon copy of my father, but not in the ways that I had been looking for it. So I'd spent all this time staying away from people that I thought were like my dad, but I was looking for the wrong things. So I wasn't matching up. And that would end up with us having my youngest one, spending all that time in counseling. From the time my son was born, we were pretty much in marriage counseling because of differences in parenting. And then what would happen is I got asked to run. I got a phone call one day while I was grading papers from a gentleman alleging to be Premier Gary Dewar's chief of staff. And would I like to come down to the legislature and consider running in the neighborhood that I was born and raised in? And I sat there on the phone while grading first year essays going, sure, you're the Premier's chief of staff, and that's the Easter Bunny coming up my driveway with the mail. So I would end up running for office. I won what was an unwinnable election, and the day afterwards, my ex assaulted me and started our acrimonious divorce. So '07 was this wonderful year of best of times, worst of times. So I got elected in an unwinnable seat by a landslide, was assaulted the next day, but couldn't call the police because my face was all over the front of the newspaper. And I knew if I called the police, my entire political career would be, in a sense, blown up because I'd be under this microscope. So got him out of the house, went through all this stuff. Again, an acrimonious divorce started that would have him assaulting me again right before Christmas. And that was even more interesting. It goes to the larger part of the challenges of this year. So I was newly elected, suddenly a single parent, learning this whole new job, dealing with all the legal stuff that was happening regarding the divorce under these circumstances. And then just to top it off, I went to my standard September, here's my fall, I'm going to go to the doctors, got back a pap test that was a little sketchy. They're like, we'll do it again. It's probably, it'll probably come back negative. Every time there was a test in this process that said, oh, well, let's just clarify, it'll probably go down a notch, it went up too. So then I was diagnosed with cervical cancer. And my ex, actually, that second assault happened 4 days before the official diagnosis and right in front of
I can't imagine all that you had on your plate. So can you remember, can you connect us to what was swirling through your mind at that point with everything on your plate? You've just been assigned as the Minister of Health of Manitoba, running all that you had to run, right?
Well, the Minister of Health stuff came later. And in fact, I was worried that I would never become the Minister of Health. I got elected into the legislature and was a backbencher for a while. And I honestly thought that with all of this, like literally getting elected and then it going sideways, I thought, oh my God, I am never going to get into cabinet. All of these people that I'm working with probably think I'm some kind of a train wreck, that they've just elected this person that sounds so good on paper, that turned a neighborhood that has always been for the other side and has never been held by anyone else. Not the third party, not any other party. And it was this weird thing where I thought, oh my God, I'm finally here. And this is all going to go sideways, and this divorce. So no, I was literally living by the skin of my teeth. And what was really interesting as well was that at that time, I was also seeking help for my mental health, and especially once the assaults happened and we were able to we access certain things for the kids and myself. I had someone say, oh, well, what you're going through, yes, it's traumatic. Yes, we'll support the kids, all this other stuff. But they actually had me diagnosed as bipolar too. So I was thrown that other thing with oh my God, I've got this to live with. How do I manage that? Am I going to need medication? So honestly, on one level, I was living by the seat of my pants. And then at the same time, when the assault happened, very shortly afterwards, one of the things that we had here in Manitoba was called a legislative review committee. So anytime a new piece of legislation would be, proposed, it had to go through this process. And it was a way to sit in and find out what was going on. So, geek girl me looking for a lecture to attend went, oh, this is how I will learn this job. And I will learn. So I sat in. And I remember one of the very first ones and the very first piece of legislation I shaped in a very small way, on one level, was a piece of legislation that had to do with safety in childcare centers. And it had to do with all the protocols. And one of the protocols was if someone enters into a childcare setting in a threatening manner with a weapon. And I just went and stuck up my hand and said, why does it need to be with a weapon? And they kind of looked at me and I said, and again, maybe this was an oversharing moment, but I didn't want people to think that I was hiding behind anything, or that if I wasn't around, I didn't want to be, I didn't want somebody to think I'd gone missing from my job when in fact I was like in cancer treatment, or I was, dealing with something else on the divorce front. So I think I might have been oversharing for some folks, but I said, you know, the reason why I'm asking about whether a weapon is involved or not is just, when my son started daycare this year, we were nearly assaulted by his father, and there was no weapon involved. And they're going to need, and the daycare didn't know what to do. So you're going to need protocols related to domestic violence, not the stranger danger, somebody entering in with a gun. Like we're in Canada, our gun laws are different. I'm not saying that, it doesn't happen here compared
Oh,
to
of
other
course, but it's so
places.
right.
And so it was this thing where, I mean, again, there was that weird look in the room, and I sat there going, you mean nobody else thought of this? Like I was sitting there, I'm recently elected. What do I know? Maybe I'm just opening my mouth. And that was a moment where a whole bunch of stuff clicked, where I went, yeah, this happened to me and it sucked. And it still sucks what I'm going through. I mean, when you end up with the three people that security know about for your constituency, and two of them are your family members, your father and your ex-husband, like that's a problem. So I sat there and went, this is crappy, but you know what? I'm in a completely empowered position. Look at the opportunity, look at the things. I'm a legislator. How many women that deal with domestic violence are in a place to shape laws? And so what I shaped there might have just been like one little subsection, one little whatever. But that was like oh, wait a second. I'm going to start using my lemons to make lemonade for other people. And that was a coping mechanism and a mindset shift that really helped me get through stuff.
So important too, because so many of us carry shame, right? For our stories, for things that have happened to us, let's say, right? That we had no control over. And yet we still carry that degree of shame. And so we don't want to own our truth, right? But to do that, to start owning your story in such a public forum too, on such a stand, right? To affect change, positive change. It's so empowering. Like you said, we can finally, the moment we really realize when our greatest vulnerability is actually our greatest strength. And it's not something we need to feel shame over. It's not something we ever should feel shame over. But the moment we realize that, it instantly becomes our greatest strength that we can use for very positive purposes.
And that was the thing. And that's why I say it was such a shift for me, because there I was, like I said, worried that I was this train wreck that was never going to, oh gosh, they're going to try to, get rid of me, or they're going to keep me in the background to the next election, and then, ditch me kind of thing. And then, so that meant that I got involved with things like the Family Violence Prevention Committee, all these other different things, and ended up doing, what, again, at the time I didn't realize was unprecedented, but in my time as a backbencher, would do two pieces of first in Canada legislation, one helping folks that use service animals, and then another one that actually helped folks relocate based on, and one of the criteria was if you were a victim of domestic violence or stalking, you could actually have your lease broken quietly. And what we actually found was that landlords liked it. So, I mean, within the first month that it, after passing, it had been used, but it was one of those things where, yeah, I knew as somebody that had gone through this, I was really lucky. I had been able to get my ex out of the house and keep him out. But I know that that wasn't the thing for everyone. I'd known so many other people that stayed where they were because, well, my name is on the lease, or so fine, both of our names are on the lease, but if I go, he's still going to stay there and I'm still on the hook, and all these other kinds of things where it's like, these are, so these are like important things that when somebody is in crisis, if you can make one of their decisions a little bit easier, if I could save somebody that grief, and that I have to say was, again, a huge thing for me just to get through it, because it's one of those things, people say things happen for a reason. And I don't believe it necessarily in that it's a predetermined thing. And like, I was, this bad thing was going to happen to me it's like, no. Things happen for a reason, in the sense that if I can find a way of giving them meaning and a reason, and again, lemons to lemonade, there's the reason. Because a lot of crappy stuff happens in the world, whether it's natural disasters that impact our lives or these kinds of things. And so for me, it was, the reason was, okay, you know what? I'm in a position that most other women aren't in when they go through with this. And it was the same thing with the cancer treatment. But I mean, it was definitely a lot to juggle. I would never recommend having all of those balls in the air at the same time.
It is always about the reframe, though, when it really comes down to it. And, finding that meaning, right, that in the adversity and in the struggle that we face, because I feel that that is what helps us shift from putting our focus onto the hardships. And I'm not saying to not be real about those hardships that come in tow, because we'll talk about that in a sec when we're not real about that. But it allows us, by finding meaning in the hardship and adversity, in no matter what we've gone through, if it's current or in the hardship and adversity that we faced in the past, because we've all faced trauma in the past, whether it's, people don't necessarily consider it as trauma, but, a bad breakup with a boyfriend or, stuff as a child, right, that we've all buried down. And, there's a difference between the traumatic event and then the trauma, right? And the trauma is the act of us bearing it down and not being real about that. So we'll get into that in a second. But this is all so important in owning our story at the same time. And excuse me, but so many of us, for various reasons out there, feel that shame, right? And then that causes trauma, just alone that sense of shame. And I can personally really relate to this. Myself for a different reason, but when I was waiting for my lungs, that was by far the hardest time for me on my path, even harder than having a 2-month terminal prognosis for various reasons. Every single day I was declining. I had lost my vision from the high dose steroids. I couldn't read a book to get distracted. I couldn't watch television or watch a movie for comic relief. I couldn't drive. I felt my sense of independence as a young mom was completely ripped away. Every day I would lose more and more function. Everyone's just saying, rest, 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 right? But there's only so much rest you can do in a day, And, but yet I felt well if I were sitting, and the second I would stand up with my lung disease, I felt as though, even on full-time oxygen, I felt as though I would lose capacity of every bodily function just walking across my kitchen. Yeah. And yet I would go to bed at night. In this time. And, my thought of my oxygen tank, was kind of putting me to bed, and I would get to sleep, and I'll never forget it. I always had the same dream where I was this bird taking flight off the Lionsgate Bridge here on the North Shore of Vancouver, Canada, where I live. And I was this bird, like almost like a songbird, taking flight, seeing the world from above, feeling so free, so alive, so well. Yes. And then fast forward, I would wake up to that thud of that oxygen tank, and the reality of my life would sit in like a brick. Right. And instantly I went from feeling so free and so alive to feeling so heavy. And in this time, I wasn't myself at all. I couldn't remember how. I'm a big chef in this house. I love to make really healthy food for my family. And, I'm always in the kitchen cooking. Excuse me, I couldn't remember how to cook. I would go to the grocery store and I would stand there feeling lost. I didn't know how to make a simple recipe, let's say. Using a visa was insanely difficult for me, just the tap purpose, I can't even begin to share all the things that came so easily before. I just felt lost with. And I'm a very bright, educated, intelligent woman, right? And I felt lost. I felt void. I didn't feel that same passion for life. And even for my loves that I had always felt. And that just made me feel more guilty.
Yes.
That made me feel more guilty, and that I was a burden to my family. Would I ever get these lungs? And if I got these lungs, would I ever come back to being me, who I am inside, right? And all these doubts swirl through your mind. And then you cast self-judgment on yourself, thinking you're the only person in the world who's going through this, right? And for me, in my environment, you have to go through extensive testing to be a candidate for double lung transplant on every front, physical, mental, everything. I was so ashamed of these emotions that I had been feeling. And I was so fearful that if I shared them with anybody, I would be off the list,
Yeah.
right? As a lung transplant recipient. I'm 80 pounds, right? I am supposed to be on full-time oxygen. I've got 2 babies, yet trying to be mummy in every front. And it was just so much. And so this instant sense of, this freedom and being alive in this dream and the threat of that oxygen tank, and yet feeling so heavy, dreading getting out of bed, being so, I remember with my kids, I had always connected with them, through sports and activities, backyard soccer. I mean, you name it, right? But now my world is entirely different. I am not an artist. I have no creative ability on that front whatsoever. And there's only so many stick sunshines you can draw with your kids. I even felt more and more defeated, right? Like, I don't know what to talk about anymore. Like, I just felt so lost.
Yeah.
But as soon as we start to open up and share the truth of what we have gone through, instantly it's less judgment, right? And we own our stories. And then no one can use our story against us, not even us. And we're the ones who use the story against us more than anybody else. We fear it in the legislature or wherever you may be. For me, in the double lung transplant world, right? We fear it in our minds. But the second we own our story and our truth of what we're experiencing, that self-judgment turns into self-compassion.
And that's a key part of it. You nailed it right there with the self-compassion and the idea that it, again, owning it turns it around. It was one of those things that for me that, getting involved with these different committees and getting involved with different things that had me being the person that, if somebody from government needed to do something, there's something happening related to shelters or something like that. I would be doing it on behalf of that minister. And I ended up, again, working with the minister associated with that portfolio and doing different things. And it was one of those things where what I also found was that owning it helped me, again, reframe it and see it, but then also being able to talk to folks. And I think people have, a reasonable perspective when they tend to be cynical about elected folks. And I mean, the comment that I kept getting back so many times was oh, so you get it. Like, we're used to having, representatives here, and this is not questioning, any of their, their authenticity or their interest in it, but you're actually one of us. And so when you're here, we don't see you as the talking head that's here on behalf of government that's reading, prepared notes. And again, we're always grateful to have somebody, from government here at these events and sharing here. So it wasn't a lack of gratitude. It was the idea that it was like there's a layer of translation that didn't need to be there anymore, that I had removed in my being someone with a similar lived experience. It was like suddenly a barrier fell, that we were one step closer. There was somebody that they could talk to, and that they didn't have to worry about shame, explanation, any of these other things. It was like, oh, okay. And so you could have those conversations and you could do those things, and that they would know that there was literally somebody on the inside that got it and that would say those things. And I think that's the other part, is that when we are going through these things, we feel like we're alone. And so that was the other part for me, was that because in some respects, I didn't have a lot of folks that I could talk to about this, because this was, again, supposed to keep it under wraps, all these kinds of things. I mean, the effort that folks in the political realm will go to keep their personal lives personal, which is good on one level, but sometimes, you don't know. And I think it's only really been in the past 10 years where you start to see folks sharing that, this member of the legislature is taking time off because they've got a such and such diagnosis. Whereas before, you're just supposed to suck it up. Your staff does stuff and manages stuff, and you take as little time off as possible, because God forbid anybody sees you at one less event, then they're going to start questioning stuff. And so that was the other part too, is to be able to model that behavior and go, yeah, guess what? I got cancer. I'm not doing all the things. And that even when I would catch myself falling back into that, I still remember walking into the chamber one day, and this is where I've already had a post-op infection. I've ended up, I'm dealing with shingles because, my immune system totally went on vacation.
Wow.
And so I thought I was well enough to show up. And because again, that whole thing you're talking about, you can only lie down so much. Yeah. When you're lying down and you're resting and you're recuperating, at some point again, if you don't have things to do, or at some point they get to be, they're not enough, you start living in your own head. and you must have had this as well, where you start overthinking and you get back into those places of shame and judgment and whatnot. And it's like, oh, I better get back into the building. Walked into the chamber, and within a matter of minutes, I go to sit down where I'm sitting. One of the cabinet ministers that I sat next to looks at me, and I mean, she's always known for being, straightforward. And she just, honey, you look like 30 bags of hammered crap. What are you doing here? And we
Well,
also sat, our chamber is rather deep. It's a U shape. So you're farther away from the speaker. So I was towards the back. Well, again, not moments after that is said to me, I watch a page come up from where the speaker is, and there is a note from the speaker, who is, again, literally the other side of the room from me. And it's you look like you look awful. You're like gray. Go home. It's okay. What are you doing here? Like, what? How can you see me from that far away? And it was like okay. I literally, was practically escorted out of the room, and practically
but it's
driven.
crazy. Like we all get so stuck on autopilot
Yeah.
that we often don't recognize it in ourselves. And we often need someone to come in from the outside looking in to say, hey, this is way off. Right. And then you're like, wow, I hadn't seen it. For me, I wouldn't have seen it without being confined to 4 white walls in my hospital room for years on end. I needed that to get me off autopilot, to really have that space and that awareness to look in and reflect and be like, wow, the way I was living did not serve me in any way, shape, or form, right? There's so much to unpack here. I want to just, really go back to this one topic about the owning our truths and owning our stories, whether it's owning our story of current or childhood stories. The second we do that, we lose that sense of heaviness that I was discussing before. And it is so freeing, right? Just to put that out in space, in conversation, right? It's so freeing. It's so uplifting in a way that we can't imagine if we're still in that phase of shame and hiding it. But I always, and with my coaching clients, we always talk a lot about, when we're holding it in and when we're really bearing it, it's like this armor that we protect ourselves with, right? But I also talk a lot about this energy reserve tank, right? That we all have. And if I'm outputting so much energy to carry this armor, I then don't have the energy to allocate to my mental or physical health, right? And so then it leads to these problems of, physical and mental disease, if you want to call it that, cancer, whatever else, right? Because we don't have the energy to heal our body in those ways that we really needed that energy to heal our body. For me, I think this awakening for me of finally letting go of all that I had carried and finally seeing the truth for myself and being vulnerable enough within myself to give myself this safe space to do so. I actually think people are always asking me, what was the one magic bullet that turned around your 2-month terminal cancer prognosis? And of course, I don't know. Was it the green juicing? Was it the waving the magic crystals? I always say it's this overall global transformation that I had from within. But at the same point, if I had to pick one, I would say it was this awakening of letting go of all that trauma that I had carried for so long and owning my truth and the freedom that I acquired from that. So it's a really important conversation. But I have a couple questions for you because you unpacked so much when you were telling us about your story. And you talked about childhood traumas, that you had also buried, right? And you adopted these survival mechanisms as you go through. And then to me, it sounds like by hearing your story, right? It sounds like you've had so many moments along the way. And I'm wondering, even with the first suicidal ideations, let's say, I'm wondering then, was there any medical professional or anybody who asked you, how was your childhood? Did you have traumatic experiences? Was there anybody who versed that with you at that point, or even with your cancer diagnosis? Was there anyone who discussed that?
No, none of that came up actually until much, much later. And I dealt with all of these other things. And so that's actually been a much more recent thing. All the supports and everything that I had been given in the past tended to be those things that get you through the moment or had to do with the crisis at hand. And it was about, it was about the divorce. It was about the assault. It was about cancer. It was about those, managing that workload. So what was really interesting, and it's interesting you mentioned about that, the idea of like owning these things, was I had hit that place where with all of this going on, and being able to do these things, finding a stride and a purpose and a reframing. And then I had another sort of aha moment with one of the things that we had change here is that we had set legislation dates brought in. So what happened was I was somebody that, because I'd never held the seat that I'd held had never been held by anyone else. And the fact that we now had a set date, so you couldn't keep, this wasn't about keeping your powder dry till an election was called. It was so I had somebody running against me consciously for 3 years. So of my first 4 years in office, I spent 3 of them under a protection order at the front end. And then, there was an overlap with the 3 years of somebody running after me. And I'd had this thing where it's like, it was really interesting because I was fighting for my life in a different way because I wanted to keep doing this job. There were these things that I wanted to accomplish. And at the same time, there was this sense, and it was like a clarity that had come to me with the cancer and all the things, like sort of once I'd had like this feeling of my own mortality, where I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do what I do. I'm going to do the best job that I can. But I'm also not going to sweat certain details anymore.
100%.
There's a lot of stuff that just doesn't matter and that is so far outside of my control. And so, I mean, I did end up under a recount, but I ended up back in office. And it was really interesting because going through that next period and what would actually lead into my going into my 2 cabinet positions, healthy living and then health, honestly came at moments where I had actually given up isn't maybe the right word, but I wasn't putting all my eggs in that basket. So I had done this stuff. I'd done this other piece of legislation. I got through this. And again, those moments of, oh my God, in the same way that first time I got elected and my life started to unravel, gee, I must be perceived as a train wreck. Well, the second time it's a recount. Okay, who's got their knives out for me now? And then I just got to this place where it's like, you know what? I'm here for 4 years. I'm going to do the best I can, take it as it comes, make the most out of it. And what was really interesting was the very day that I sat there with my staff in my office going, okay, I guess I'm planning my 3rd run for office, my second, seeking reelection again, a couple of years down the road with, being a backbencher, no cabinet portfolio to kind of rely on. Literally, we were planning that. A phone call came in and I was suddenly told to just show up at the legislature. And anyways, I ended up going into cabinet that Monday morning afterwards. But it was that weird thing where literally at the moments where I had kind of, given up isn't the right word. I had released myself from all the expectations. That's when the next good thing happened. And that was the same thing that happened with coming into the health portfolio. And then it was actually in both of those portfolios where I became more and more open with my mental health and with my neurodiversity. And actually, I still have a staff member, Tim, who I'm sure to this day has probably got the full list emblazoned in his memory, but he started the magical list of words the minister is not allowed to say, and superpowers was pretty much the top of that list, because that's when we had started the reframing with my son who was in crisis. And
for me, I call it a lot of this idea of surrendering.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And surrendering, and the old adage of, change the things, grant me the courage to change the things I can change, and the courage to accept the things I cannot change. Right. And for me, that came ringing true with my cancer diagnosis as well. And looking back on my life and being stuck in that autopilot zone with zero awareness, just being so go, so driven, so successful in my practice and owning this great multidisciplinary health center, right? Just so go in every way. I was even given this book. You and I were speaking about my friend, Dr. Gabor Mate, before the show, and how we both admire him so much. And I had even been given his book, When the Body Says No, because this is really what I want to talk about with all of these factors that you've experienced up until now, right? When your body was really screaming no, And so I was given this book, When the Body Says No, when I was in active practice, right? And when my practice was fully booked, I would come in early. I would stay super late. Everyone around me kept recognizing. I would throw the biggest clinic parties, I just loved that zone. I loved helping others live their healthiest life. Yeah. And somehow I was ignoring my own, thinking I was living my healthiest life with the best foods and everything else. But I hadn't tuned into my thoughts within and how my mind just kept racing to what was next. Mm-hmm. And I was given the book, but When the Body Says No. by a colleague who definitely recognized I was just too go, go, go. And I humbly accepted the book, right? Excuse me, my voice is cracking from talking so much today. I humbly accepted the book, but put it up on my bookshelf, right? Because I was too busy to read a darn book at that time, right? Helping everybody else, right? And would never take that amount of time for myself at that point, you know? And only when I got sick did I really look back. There were so many signs when my body was screaming, no, Erica, tune in, listen, reflect, right? You've got to deal with all the stuff that you have buried down. You know, for me in practice, I would get strep throat literally every 30 days, like clockwork. You know, literally I would be on antibacterial medication, crazy spiking high fevers the night before, and I would still go to work. You know, I then had this terrible disc herniation because as a, you know, small framed woman treating these big athletes every day and repeating constant bending forward position twisting, right? I ended up herniating a disc in my low back and had nerve damage down my leg, on the right side of my leg. I would go in limping to my office to help other people. You know, the phase that we can get in when we're so stuck, right? In our narrow tunnel vision. I was so stuck in that narrow tunnel vision. It wouldn't have mattered how many people told me, you know, rest more, have meditation. I was the girl in yoga who was like, you know, at the end of the hot yoga class, it'd be like, you know, the Shavasana, you're lying on your back and everyone's so into the rest and the meditation. And my eyes were wide open, looking side to side. Okay, the workout's done. Like, let's go, people, right? Like, this is done. I got to get out of here. I've got to go.
That sounds way too familiar. That sounds way too familiar. I think you and I did some parallel yoga classes.
Right. And then in retrospect, it's looking back on it and it's absurd that we talk about that energy reserve tank. I had no energy reserve left to heal myself.
No.
Let alone to even have an awareness about myself. I was so go, go, go. I didn't even see the symptoms that were blazing at me with leukemia because I hadn't heard all those little talks that my body talk was saying, you know, tune in to me, Erica, tune in. And then by the time I had leukemia, gosh, it was screaming and it was on fire. Right.
This is it. It was the same thing with my own diagnosis. And then what happened with the post-op and the shingles was a friend of mine who's a nurse was just like, honey, like your body gave you this one sign. It was the tap on the shoulder. Now this was kind of like, you know, this is a bit of a push. Okay, now the universe is running at you with a frying pan and whacking you in the face. When are you going to take the hint?
But the second we have the realization that it's all about this idea of surrendering, your world changes. And so for me, gosh, I did not want to be, I felt institutionalized in that hospital room. I felt I was there against my will. Some days I had to be confined by shackles to my ICU bed because I was pulling out my tube unconsciously, right? But I literally needed to be confined in there to realize, to have the lessons, to have the stillness in my heart, to hear these profound lessons in the way that I was living my life, to the way that I now live my life with this stillness and calm in my heart. And I always talk about owning every second. And I think that's so important because none of us know what comes our way tomorrow. But that doesn't mean being so go, go, go. For me in my previous life, you know, my kids love to be on the beach, right? And they can make driftwood, forts out of driftwood for hours on end. But in my previous life, I would have been like, no, boys, we got to go. We got to run to the end. We got to run back. And then we're going to go A, B, C, D. We got to go here, there, you know? And now my version of owning every second, you know, was the title of my TED Talk too. I really believe in this idea, is now to go sit cross-legged by a log, watching my boys frolic for hours on end at the beach. And that is how I own every single second. You know, it's this richness that I now get to live with by way of surrendering.
Oh no, I mean, I totally agree. And you're talking about the hospital experience. I swear I was discharged from the hospital to stem a nursing riot. I will swear to that to this day because I was not staying in the, you know, I was, it was just like, get the IV out of me, get this out of me. Where's the real food? I had my friend like bringing food into the hospital for me because I wasn't going to eat this and that. And it was just get me out. And I even found out that the hotel, I had to go out of town for the surgery. So the hotel I had to stay in across the street from the hospital, I found out that they had a treadmill. So I was like, you know, checking in with the doctor the next day, like, is 5 kilometers enough for me to be walking every day? And she's like, what are
Yeah.
you doing? Like, get your ass in the bed.
For me, exactly. It was the same way, you know, entertaining 60 people a day on my exercise bike. Like, what can I get you from the water fountain, you know? But it was that idea again of surrendering finally, this awakening that I had. And it immediately shifted. I literally closed the door for visitors, right? I finally went inward and reflected and heard all of those lessons. And I found a way to maximize the power of right now, right? Even when I was in the hospital. And I found then a richness in, you know, the people I met, from the nurses to the doctors, to the cleaners, to the porters, to the lunch ladies. I'm still great friends with them all now. I walk into the hospital and I feel like I have a super, like an entire arena of cheerleaders. You know, I feel like I've won the Super Bowl every time I walk in there. But I found a richness in the moment of now. And I found a way to really appreciate that I was meeting all these new people, that I was experiencing all these new things. And I felt blessed for that. And that idea of surrendering really shifted my thoughts on so much. And I really feel that it was all those inner awakenings that I had that really created that difference in my survival and in being here with you today.
Well, I would agree. And the shift that I saw happening, remember, like I said, that thing about that phone call, but what was interesting is sort of in that year leading up to it, I had been in a place where I crossed paths with an old high school friend who turns out, you know, lived in the neighborhood. And anyways, we were starting to hang out. We ended up going out. We spent about a year together. And what was really interesting was in that year, we did a whole bunch of stuff. Our kids were similar age. And it was the first time that I had been in office where I was like, nope, I'm taking this weekend off because we are going to the cottage. No, we are going out and we are doing, you know, and there was different things. And it was everything from, you know, hunting up, you know, up in some rural areas here, and then having the, you know, the time to process the moose meat or the caribou and these kinds of things. And it was this really interesting thing where that was like the first time I was like, no, I'm going to turn down that event. It's on this night and we're doing whatever, and putting our kids first and doing these things. Not that I was, you know, I wasn't negligent with my kids, but it was always that this is mommy's job thing. And so it was that idea of two of the boundaries. So it was this recognition that the world wasn't going to fall off its axis. I was still living up to my obligations and my job description. But what was really interesting was I had that year where I was actually, again, surrendering to certain thing, and, you know, surrendering to what was outside of my control, and also going, again, like you say, living in that moment, appreciating those things, doing those things. And that was what I found really interesting, was that year where by my previous standards, I would have said I was sloughing off. And instead, that period where I was actually listening to like what I needed, and having those healthy boundaries, again, that was what led to getting that phone call. And that one of the comments from the premier at the time was how active, how present I had been, all of these, you know. And I was like, but dude, this is like the year that I feel like I have done that I've done the least. Oh, wait a minute. 90% of what I was worrying about before and being out there and being whatever really didn't matter. But I was so caught up in the, you know, why do something when you could overdo it? And so,
well, if we can actually master the art of doing nothing, our productivity oddly increases ginormously.
yeah,
So
well,
yeah, it's magical. But we are ready. You and I could talk for hours on end. We are running time.
I'm so sorry. Oh gosh.
Okay. I want to hear all about how you share and how you help others bring out their superpowers in the face of illness or hardship.
Well, it came from, like I said, my son being in crisis, and like me, he's neurodivergent, but it showed up more obviously. But at the same time, when I was asking to, you know, folks at school to get diagnosis, this and that, it would basically take us from.
Can you pause for 1 sec? Can you pause? What is neurodivergent? Just so
neurodivergent. Those of us that have anything from within that can be autism, ADD, ADHD, anything where non-neurotypical. For him, for example, he has ADD, dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia, meaning he has problems processing letters, writing letters, and also certain mathematical concepts. And that also involves certain memory and executive function differences. And so what happened was I saw this kid struggling. We weren't getting any kind of support or response. And he literally had a meltdown where he told me how he was broken. And if I loved him, I wouldn't make him go to school. And he rattled off this list of things. Now, this is a kid that's like 7 years old. And so what I found myself doing, and again, this goes from, you can see from the background behind me, I mean, these kids have been raised on, a whole bunch of different geekdoms, but the Marvel universe was a key part of it. And so I said to him, sweetheart, you're not broken. You are like an X-Man and you have mutant superpowers. And I used the example of Cyclops because we had recently seen a movie with Cyclops. And I said, look at how Cyclops can use his vision to, like, that laser vision to, like, blow up the bad guys, protect his friends, save the world. But if he doesn't put his visor down, he can also set his underwear on fire when he goes to school, like getting ready for school in the morning. So we use that metaphor of the visor. And I caught myself doing, after that conversation and soothing him and going, reframing everything that he did. And like, oh, so that means you're empathetic. Oh, that means you're analytical. Oh, that means you're this. And it was that reframing. And what I found was that in reflecting back on that, like, did I just say this to, make my kid feel good? I went, oh my God, so much about what I've been doing my whole life was unconsciously doing this. And I've often joked, and I mean, that Stan Lee was my first therapist because he gave me safe adults and he gave me metaphors, and that what I had done was, basically attach all of these things. So this is how I got my son through to a point. He would eventually get these diagnoses, but it would take, several years. And that was when, like I said, I was in office and told not to use these words. But one of the things that happened when I was in office was becoming Minister of Health. We lost a local artist here, and his mother was in the media about it. I would connect with her, and we would do some things that would start to make some changes. But one of the things that I did was I went public with my mental health, because in wanting to make these changes, I didn't want to just be seen as, oh, here's some politician and she just wants to do X. It was like, no, 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 no. This young man died because the system did not respond to him properly. And I am no different than him in having had, and there were other incidents in my life of suicidal ideation and attempt. So it's like, if the system wasn't good enough for Reed, it isn't good enough for me. And so that's why I'm making these changes. And I want people to know that I am no different from them. I am just another person with a mental health diagnosis. And yes, I am responsible for a $6 billion budget, but guess what? All of those things about my neurodivergence and my mental health have actually made me stronger. Living through depression gives me grounded realism. ADHD is the common term. I use the term vast variable attention stimulus trait, which is a much more positive trait and takes in the entire scope. But that allows me to connect the dots. So I was able to connect dots, critique things. Anxiety brain makes me a strategic thinker. If there's ever a place where you need strategic thinkers who don't just have a plan A, but have plans B through L, it's in office or some other kinds of high level stuff. So that's what I do now. Is in coming out of office, basically I had some folks, say, well, you used to talk about this, what's that about? And the next thing you know, I was getting speaking gigs, and then I basically turned it into a program, because I want other folks to see that thing, that causes them so much grief, if it's supported the right way, understood, is in fact a superpower that you take and you reframe and you build up. And it can do amazing things. And we stop and think about how many folks that have gone through things, and we go, oh, well, we put it down to their creative artistry, or we put it down to, suffering artists. It's like, no, 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 no. There are skill sets there, and we acquire empathy and compassion, and those things, those are vital in our lives. But
Yeah,
there are also
100%.
things that, again, from an organizational and leadership perspective, oh, those soft skills, and like, no, these are like the,
Fundamental.
the life altering things. These are the aha moments. So yeah, that's what I do now. Is I use fandom. The Marvel universe is one of them, to teach people to, how they can embrace their superpowers and take those things that give them challenges and find the assets in them, and how those assets can actually be their greatest strengths. And
Well, I really concur with that, because, on my journey, I very much believe, one of our resilience tools
yeah.
can be adopting an alter ego, right? And for me, it was for me, I admit, I own my truths to the world. It was Wonder Woman, right?
Yeah.
And I had to see myself as Wonder Woman to get through all that I did. And, if I'm going on stage, I speak a lot on stage. If I'm feeling like even the slightest bit of anxiety, which I usually don't, but if I'm feeling even the slightest bit of anxiety, I own my truth and I picture myself as Miss America walking out, but I think that adopting those alter egos, I think it's really, really important on our path. And gosh, we are out of time. We could talk more. I wish that that we had more time, but I really just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing your truth and for owning your truth and for sharing it on this platform in such a raw and open manner. I really admire you. And curious on two things. How can my audience get in touch with you?
Oh, well, first of all, thank you so much. And for giving me the opportunity to connect with your audience in your world. Best way would be the website, the speakup.co.
Right.
And that's where, and there's going to be some changes and some new things coming up. The program is going to be the Embrace Your Superpowers program is becoming an online membership community. So I'm developing that because, again, in this world now, especially with COVID and everything, this gives folks the opportunity to do this reframing and go through these different exercises and find their voice and find a community on their own time and in their own way and space. And so it would be through Speak Up.
I love it. And can you leave my audience, please, and thank you, with one actionable, tangible change that they can affect in their lives today in the face of, anything hard that they're facing, in the face of hardship, adversity, and it can be big, it can be small. What is one actionable change that they can implement today, that will help them rise, that will help them balance back, and that will help them thrive in the face of these sometimes dark and hard days?
Oh, it's one of my favorite tools. And one of the things that I teach in my program it's called Name, Tame, and Reframe. When we are feeling something, especially, and I'll start with anxiety, and that's usually the best place to start is when you're feeling anxious or nervous. Actually, by naming it and owning it, you automatically take down its power. A lot of times we don't like to talk about our emotions and feelings for fear that they will overtake us. So name it, own it, name it, and then that tames it, and then you reframe it. Our brain has a hard time telling excitement from anxiety. And so instead of thinking about, for example, you're mentioning public speaking, instead of I'm anxious about being on stage, I'm excited to be on stage. And there's research that indicates that folks do far better when they have that reframing. So what's something that you can find out something that you can be excited about what you're doing rather than anxious. So are you excited to go visit a new place, meet a new person, and the opportunity? So name, tame, and reframe. And then that can get adapted in a whole bunch of other ways. But if something is making you feel off or challenging you, name it, tame it, and reframe it. And then
how would I name it?
Well, for example, like if it is anxiety, you would say, I'm feeling anxious about this, but I can't. For example, I could have been really nervous about being on here today and going, I don't know what kind of questions you're asking me. I don't know what your audience is like, but instead I see it as I'm excited to be here because there's a new opportunity. I get to meet a new person. And if there's one thing that I can say that might help somebody else, that's worth it. That's worth it to me. And that especially when a lot of us, again, we were talking about shame and what other people think about us. Well, I've got 2 kids, 2 boys. Like, I don't worry about what people think of me because I've already been told numerous times, as much as they love me, I'm not cool. So I'm over that. So I am just excited. So if folks can name, tame, and reframe, and find their own way of doing it too, because that's the other part too, is just know that naming it tames it, and then you reframe it to something positive. And if you can find something else that's, again, like excitement, something positive, it empowers us and gives us that ability. It gives us that energy to rise up and above and taps into using that energy in a good way rather than burning it off the way,
Yeah. On that note, one of my doctors had always told me when I was first diagnosed with cancer, he said, Erica, you've just taken a detour from your highway, right? And you're going to find that entrance ramp soon. And then, to be honest, I survived this 2 months terminal prognosis. I then have the bone marrow transplant. I have all the complications I do, have the double lung transplant, face a multi-drug resistant viral strain and another year in the hospital, then face divorce. And to be honest, all this time, I'm like, where the heck is my on-ramp? Like, where's the on-ramp for my highway? And so I've come to reframe it myself in the sense that there was no more on-ramp, right? I was intended to get off that highway that I was on because it wasn't serving me. And this all propelled me to be on the highway that I'm now on, right?
Exactly.
And without all of it, I would still be stuck over here. Yeah.
Oh no, and as much as I would have loved to have stayed in office, and I had a big, huge to-do list to do, things that I wanted to do as health minister, it's had I not got off that path and that ramp was no longer serving me, I wouldn't be doing the things that I'm doing now. And I mean, I've been invited to speak and to meet folks that I never would have imagined otherwise. If somebody had told me that the first academic article that I would publish after 15 years was going to be in a Korean magazine about mental health and K-pop, I would have been like, in what parallel universe and what is this K-pop you speak of? I do a lot of work now. The other fandom that I use is Bangtan Soyeodan, BTS. And that's opened up a whole other world. But again, I had to get off that one ramp to get onto the other one. So sometimes we're
surrender.
Yeah. Exactly.
All right. Gosh, risers and thrivers, we hope that you have loved this show. We've got some great shows coming up too. Our next show will be all about weight loss management and really a fitness revolution that we can all put into place. So really excited for that one as well. All the best, risers and thrivers. Make it a great day. All the best.
It's gonna be a good day. Thanks so much for joining us today. Take this inspiration forward. Learn more at risetoday.com/podcast. And please do help us in our mission to spread hope, inspiration, and positivity by encouraging those in your circle to join us and to tune in for our next show of inspiration coming soon. Please contact us if you have a powerful story to share with us to inspire the world. Until next time, get out there and rise today.